Joshua Roch Thomas.
Mr. Speaker, sir, the pandemic response was a massive effort by all quarters of Singapore society. Many members have expressed appreciation to various segments, including our healthcare workers, our private and people sectors, our own citizens doing their part in their own way. In my speech, sir, I would like to express gratitude to our public servants. It has often been mentioned in this debate that with hindsight, everything is clear. With hindsight, it is easy to criticize, and criticism taken correctly, including self-criticism, lends itself to identifying weaknesses, improving capabilities, and doing better in future. This is what the White Paper does. But, as the Honourable MOS Sun Xueling said yesterday, it is the actions of the man in the arena, when he is in the arena, with dust, sweat, and blood on his face, that determines the outcome of the battle. Furthermore, in this battle, the gladiator was blindfolded because we were dealing with an enemy of which little was known. So it should not be unexpected that there was a good amount of shifting and adjusting as we understood more, and even some backtracking in some cases. I thought I should share my experience as a TAC representative of an essential service during the pandemic who worked with various government bodies. The security industry operated throughout the pandemic, with officers being deployed on site even during the circuit breaker. Our numbers were fairly large, with over 40,000 workers going to their workplace every day. There were significant measures imposed on these workers as well as their employers, who had to ensure that the proper procedures were implemented on the ground, that personal protection equipment was made available, and that they complied with administrative requirements imposed by the government. For example, during the circuit breaker, employers had to seek approval from MTI for quotas for the number of workers who could be deployed at site. These had to be sought and updated on a daily basis, with names of workers at site provided, and it proved to be an administratively onerous and unwieldy system. This and other impositions presented an administrative burden on employers who had to juggle manpower constraints and day-to-day operations that had changed rapidly due to new requirements in access control like temperature taking, with a genuine desire to protect their workers and to comply with government regulations. The agencies I worked with in particular were Enterprise Singapore, the Ministry of Home Affairs, and the Ministry of Trade and Industry, and at varying levels of staff seniority. I have several observations working with these government bodies in respect of an essential service industry deploying a large manpower base. First, I found that these agencies made considerable effort to reach out to explain new measures, to provide updates, and where necessary, to carry out Zoom briefings. During the circuit breaker, I received updates almost on a daily basis. And as a result of all this information coming to my TAC, we were empowered to ourselves send daily updates to our members. And these communications involve not only information on the measures to be taken on the ground, but also schemes that were concurrently being rolled out, like enterprise financing schemes and support for digital solutions by the IMDA. Second, the officers whom I was liaising with were very responsive. The White Paper mentioned that ESG received over 200,000 calls in 2020 alone. And I understand that ESG officers from all departments and at all seniorities were roped in to man the lines. And I will confess, sir, that probably not an insignificant number of these calls were made by my own TAC staff. The officers I was liaising with were also easily contactable by phone, WhatsApp messages, and Zoom. And furthermore, they were also contactable and working day and night, weekday and weekend. My third observation was that not only were they contactable, but they were also working actively to address our concerns, and many accommodations were made on the fly. I mentioned earlier one of the more administratively onerous requirements during the circuit breaker that employers faced, the need to seek approval from MTI for headcount quotas for on-site workers. Employers had urgently approached my TAC that they had received approvals for headcounts far less than what they had requested for. For example, an employer providing security services and access control at government quarantine facilities and dormitories had requested for a headcount of 580, but was only granted approval for 268. Another employer that was providing services to foreign embassies, data centers, and dormitories requested for a quota of 729, but was granted approval for only 409. This meant that these companies did not have approval for the headcount they needed to carry out the very measures that had been rolled out and that were required by the government and that their clients had engaged them for. Of course, I understood that this portal and the system had been rolled out for all Singapore companies. But for employers on the ground, receiving such a reduced quota was extremely frustrating and shocking. It made it more difficult that helplines could not give them a definitive solution as to how to increase their allocated headcount, other than to submit an appeal through the Go Business platform. Because these quotas were given on a daily basis, employers had literally no time to react or to wait for appeal results. Even worse, some of these appeals resulted in less headcount being approved, or just a marginal increase. To add to these troubles, MOM also rolled out an SG Work Pass app for foreign workers at the same time, and many workers who were approved on the MTI platform appeared not to be approved in the SG Work Pass app at the same time. We raised these issues with MHA and ESG and asked for them to urgently look into it. The consequence of complying with these quotas was that many sites would be left with no security, and many measures like temperature taking and access control would not have been fulfilled because the vendors that were supposed to carry these out simply did not have the required number of approved headcount. Very quickly, MHA informed us, and we subsequently informed our members, that security officers who were not yet approved on the SG Work Pass app could continue to be deployed while MHA sorted out the back-end approvals with MOM. Both MHA and ESG also assured us that security officers could still be deployed while MHA and ESG worked with MTI on the headcount approvals. And all this was done on a Sunday, specifically the 3rd of May 2020. Eventually, my TAC worked with MHA and MTI even down to the headcounts for individual employers. These are examples of precisely the shifting and adjusting that was being done by our public servants as the situation unfolded. As feedback was coming in and as it became apparent that changes had to be made to some of the government's requirements. The security industry, because we have seen the successful effects of our feedback, and I personally come out of this pandemic experience with a greater appreciation and respect for our public servants. Public servants like Mr. Dhruv Ang from Enterprise Singapore, who actively reached out and acted as a coordinator for us across various government agencies. Mr. Jonathan Mark Capel from MHA, who swiftly and tirelessly supported our companies and their operational needs. And Mr. Albert Sui and Mr. Robbie Poo from MTI, who worked with us on the headcount quotas. So I named these officers who helped us to get through the pandemic because we often look at our public service as a faceless, nameless, monolithic organization. But sir, it is made up of individuals, many of whom contributed so much to the pandemic response effort and who have made a real difference. The Honourable Member Mr. Liang Ying Hua mentioned yesterday and commended the considerable effort by government officers to secure vaccines and masks. If we look at the sheer scale of government intervention, including for businesses and jobs, the effort put in by our public service must have been Herculean. From implementing the Job Support Scheme, which disbursed almost $30 billion to tens of thousands of businesses, to more targeted schemes like the Hawkers and Heartlands Go Digital programs and the Food Delivery Booster Package, or efforts to help SMEs with their leases. Behind all these initiatives are public servants who had to conceptualize these schemes, think about the details and what they were trying to address, how to execute them, and then actually executing them and adjusting accordingly, of course, under the able leadership of the MTF. This would have taken tremendous hard work under trying and urgent conditions. Let us also not forget our diplomats overseas, many of whom were stationed in countries where the pandemic situation was far worse than in Singapore. They remained in these foreign countries to provide assistance to Singaporeans and to help them get back home. Sir, there are not many countries that can so quickly roll out so many schemes so effectively and have the ability to adjust and change as required. I am strongly of the view, sir, that one of the things that we should take back from our COVID-19 pandemic experience is the robustness of our public service and confidence in its ability to respond and serve in any future crisis. In this regard, I would like to express my gratitude to all our public servants who worked hard and were instrumental in getting us through the pandemic. Sir, finally, I would also like to commend the Honourable Leader of the Opposition and the Workers' Party for its position that in a crisis it would seek unity of purpose and support the government of the day's efforts to deal with the crisis, instead of seeking to opportunistically seek political mileage. This ensures that the government will be able to focus on dealing with the critical and urgent issues in the crisis without being distracted by political challenges and considerations. It will also help to bring our people together instead of sowing division. The Workers' Party's stance on this is patently responsible, and it is a type of politics that we want to see in Singapore. This is a position that Mr. Singh had expressed at the start of the pandemic, and I'm heartened that he has repeated it in this debate. It gives me confidence, sir, and it should give all Singaporeans confidence that in times of crisis, we will unite as a country, as a society, and as a polity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.